It was a cool autumn evening when I decided to take a solo hike through the dense woods of Black Ridge National Park. I'd been a park ranger for about 5 years at that point, and I thought I'd seen it all. Lost hikers, bear encounters, even a few strange disappearances that never quite added up. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. The sun was setting fast, casting long shadows across the trail. I was on my usual patrol, making sure no one was out too late. The park closed at dusk, and I didn't want anyone getting stuck out here after dark. The woods had a way of playing tricks on you when the light faded. I'd heard stories from other rangers about strange noises, flickering lights, and even whispers in the trees. But I always brushed them off. I wasn't the superstitious type, at least not back then. I was about to head back to the ranger station when I saw her, a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, standing at the edge of the trail. She was wearing a white dress, which struck me as odd. Who hikes in a dress? And in this weather, she was barefoot too, her feet caked in dirt. My first thought was that she was lost or hurt, so I called out to her. "Hey, are you okay? The park's closing soon. You shouldn't be out here." She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at me with these hollow, empty eyes. I took a step closer, and that's when I noticed something off. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her hair was matted and wet, like she'd been out in the rain. But it hadn't rained in days. "Miss?" I tried again, my voice a little shakier this time. "Do you need help?" She tilted her head slowly, like she was studying me. Then, without a word, she turned and walked into the trees. I hesitated for a moment, but my training kicked in. If she was in trouble, I couldn't just let her wander off, so I followed her. The deeper we went into the woods, the colder it got. It was like the temperature dropped with every step. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I could see hers too, even though she didn't seem bothered by the cold. She moved silently, gliding over the fallen leaves like she wasn't even touching the ground. I tried to keep up, but she was always just out of reach. "Wait!" I called after her. "Stop! You're gonna get lost." She didn't stop. She led me to an old, abandoned cabin deep in the woods. I'd never seen it before, and I knew this park like the back of my hand. The cabin looked like it had been there for decades, maybe longer. The wood was rotted, the windows shattered, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. The girl stopped in front of it and turned to face me. For the first time, she spoke. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please." Before I could respond, she disappeared, just vanished. 1 second she was there, and the next, she was gone. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell had just happened? I wanted to leave, to run back to the safety of the ranger station, but something compelled me to step inside the cabin. The air inside was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and the walls were covered in strange symbols carved into the wood. In the center of the room was an old, rusted chair, and on it sat a tattered journal. Against my better judgment, I picked it up and started to read. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas Hargrove, a park ranger who had worked here in the 1920s. He wrote about a series of disappearances that had plagued the park: hikers, campers, even other rangers. They would vanish without a trace, and no one could explain why. Thomas had been determined to find out what was happening, but as I turned the pages, his writing became more frantic, more disjointed. He talked about hearing voices, seeing shadows move on their own, and feeling like he was being watched. The last entry was dated October 31st, 1927. "I found her," he wrote. "The girl in the white dress. She's not alive, but she's not dead either. She's trapped here, and she's not alone. They're all here, all the ones who disappeared. They're angry and they want revenge. I don't know how much longer I can hold them off. If anyone finds this, please, don't come looking for me. Don't come looking for any of us." I dropped the journal, my hands trembling. This had to be some kind of prank, right? A sick joke left behind by some bored hiker. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The girl I'd seen, the cabin, the journal, it was all real. And I wasn't alone. I heard it then, a low, guttural growl coming from the shadows. I turned, but there was nothing there, just darkness. Then another sound, this time from behind me, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Help us." I bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and my breath came out in visible clouds. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, coming from all around me. I could feel them closing in, their cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned, and there she was, the girl in the white dress, her eyes black as coal, her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice echoing in the small space. "Now you're one of us." I don't remember how I got out of that cabin. All I know is that I woke up the next morning, lying on the trail a mile from the ranger station. My clothes were torn, my hands scratched and bleeding, and I had no memory of how I got there. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't alone. I could feel them, the others, watching me from the shadows, waiting for me to let my guard down. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't go back to those woods, not after what I'd seen. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispers again. They're faint, but they're there. And I know it's only a matter of time before they come for me. So, if you're ever hiking in Black Ridge National Park and you see a girl in a white dress standing at the edge of the trail, don't follow her. Just turn around and run. Because once she has you, you'll never leave.
Story number 2.
It was a quiet, moonless night when I first heard the scratching. I was staying at my grandmother's old farmhouse, deep in the rural backroads of Kentucky. She had passed away a few weeks earlier, and I'd been tasked with cleaning out the place. The house was ancient, creaking with every gust of wind, and it always felt like it was watching you. But I tried to ignore that. I told myself it was just my imagination. The scratching started around midnight. At first, I thought it was a tree branch tapping against the window, but when I looked outside, there was nothing there. The sound was coming from inside the house. It was faint, almost rhythmic, like something was clawing at the walls. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the noise, my heart pounding in my chest. It led me to the basement door. The door was old, with peeling paint and a rusted handle. I hadn't been down there yet. The thought of it gave me the creeps. But the scratching was louder now, more urgent. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The air was damp and cold, and the beam of my flashlight barely cut through the thick shadows. The scratching stopped as soon as my foot hit the basement floor. The silence was worse. It felt heavy, oppressive, like the walls were closing in around me. I swept the flashlight around the room, revealing stacks of old furniture, boxes, and tools. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, and then I saw it, a large wooden chest in the corner. It was old, with intricate carvings on the lid. Something about it made my skin crawl. The scratching started again, louder this time, and it was coming from inside the chest. I don't know what possessed me to open it. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something else, something darker. But I knelt down in front of the chest and lifted the lid. The smell hit me first, rotten, decaying, like something had died in there. And then I saw what was inside. Bones. Human bones. They were small, like they belonged to a child, and they were arranged in a strange pattern, almost like a ritual. My stomach churned, and I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, casting eerie shadows on the walls. That's when I noticed the symbols. They were carved into the stone walls, just like the ones on the chest, and they were glowing faintly, a sickly green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. I wanted to run, to get out of that basement and never look back, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were rooted to the spot. And then I heard it, a voice whispering from the shadows. "You shouldn't have opened it." I spun around, but there was no one there. The voice came again, this time from behind me. "Now you've let us in." I finally found the strength to move. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, huddled under a blanket with all the lights on. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that the stress of losing my grandmother and dealing with the house was getting to me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The next morning, I called a local handyman to help me clear out the basement. I didn't tell him about the chest or the bones. I just said I needed help moving some heavy furniture. He was a friendly guy in his late 50s with a thick southern accent. He didn't ask too many questions, which I was grateful for. We were halfway through clearing out the basement when he found the chest. He called me over, his face pale. "You seen this?" he asked, pointing to the carvings on the lid. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. "These symbols, they're bad news," he he said, his voice low. My granddaddy used to tell stories about this kind of thing, said they were used to trap spirits to keep them from causing trouble. But if you open the chest, you break the seal, and then all hell breaks loose. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do we do? I asked. He shook his head. Ain't nothing you can do. Once they're out, they're out. Best thing you can do is get as far away from this place as possible. I wanted to take his advice. I really did, but something kept me there. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't explain. Whatever it was, I couldn't leave. Not yet. That night, the scratching started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the basement. It was coming from inside the walls. I could hear it moving, creeping closer with every passing second. And then the whispers started. They were faint at first, but they grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I didn't need to. I could feel their anger, their hatred. They wanted me gone. I tried to leave. I packed a bag and headed for the door, but it wouldn't open. No matter how hard I pulled, it was like something was holding it shut. The whispers turned to laughter, cruel and mocking. I turned around, and that's when I saw them. Shadows, moving on their own, slithering across the walls like snakes. They were coming for me. I don't remember how I got out of the house. All I know is that I woke up the next morning, lying in the middle of the road a mile away. My clothes were torn, my hands scratched and bleeding, and I had no memory of how I got there. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. I could feel them, the shadows, watching me from the corners of my vision, waiting for me to let my guard down. I sold the farmhouse a week later. I didn't tell the new owners about the chest or the bones. I didn't tell them about the shadows. I just wanted to be rid of the place. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the scratching again. It's faint, but it's there. And I know it's only a matter of time before they come for me. So if you're ever driving through Kentucky and you see an old farmhouse with a rusted mailbox and overgrown weeds, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't even look at it, because once you see it, they'll see you too. And they'll never let you go.
Story number 3.
It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. My friends and I had rented an old cabin in the woods. The kind of place that looked like it belonged on a postcard. It was surrounded by towering pines with a crystal clear lake just a short walk away. The owner had warned us that the cabin was a bit off the grid, but we didn't mind. We were looking for peace and quiet, a break from the chaos of the city. What we got was something else entirely. The first night started off fine. We built a fire in the stone fireplace, cracked open a few beers, and told stories late into the night. But as the hours passed, I started to feel uneasy. It was like the woods were too quiet, like the animals had all gone silent. I tried to shake the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination, but then I heard it. A faint knocking sound coming from the front door. "Did you hear that?" I asked, looking around at my friends. They all shook their heads, laughing it off. "Relax, man," one of them said. "It's probably just the wind." I wanted to believe him, but the knocking came again, louder this time. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate, almost rhythmic. I stood up and walked to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I hesitated for a moment, then pulled it open. There was no one there, just the dark, empty porch and the endless trees beyond. I stepped outside, scanning the area, but there was nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone. I was about to go back inside when I heard it again, this time coming from the side of the cabin. I followed the sound, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The knocking grew louder as I rounded the corner, and then it stopped. I shone the light around, but there was nothing there, just the woods, stretching out like a black void. I was about to turn back when I saw it, a figure, standing at the edge of the trees. It was tall and thin, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to stretch too far. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its eyes on me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. And then, slowly, it raised one arm and pointed at the cabin. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran back inside, slamming the door shut behind me. "What's wrong?" one of my friends asked, seeing the look on my face. "There's something out there," I said, my voice shaking. "I saw it. It was pointing at the cabin." They all laughed, thinking I was joking. But when I didn't laugh back, the mood shifted. We locked the doors and windows just to be safe and spent the rest of the night huddled around the fire. No one wanted to admit it, but we were all on edge. The next morning, we tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just a deer or a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I'd seen something, and it wasn't natural. We decided to explore the woods that day, hoping to shake off the unease. The sun was shining, and the forest seemed less ominous in the daylight. But as we walked deeper into the trees, I started to notice things. Strange symbols carved into the bark, piles of stones arranged in odd patterns, and bones scattered on the ground. My friends tried to convince me it was just animal bones, but I wasn't so sure. We reached the lake around midday. It was beautiful, the water so clear you could see the bottom. But as we got closer, I noticed something floating near the shore. It was a doll, old and weathered, with its face half rotted away. One of my friends picked it up, laughing nervously. "Creepy," he said, tossing it back into the water. But as soon as the doll hit the surface, the air changed. The temperature dropped, and the sky darkened, even though there weren't any clouds. The water began to ripple, and then it started to bubble, like something was rising from the depths. We backed away, our laughter turning to panic. And then we saw it. A hand, pale and bloated, reaching out of the water. It was followed by another, and then a head, its hair matted and dripping. The figure pulled itself onto the shore, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was the same thing I'd seen the night before, but now it was closer. Too close. We ran. We didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to think. We just ran, crashing through the trees, our breath coming in ragged gasps. The cabin was our only hope, the only place we could think to go. But when we got there, the door was wide open. We hesitated, but we didn't have a choice. We went inside, slamming the door shut behind us. The knocking started almost immediately, louder and more frantic than before. It was coming from all around us, the walls, the ceiling, the floor. And then the whispers started, low and guttural, like voices speaking in reverse. We barricaded ourselves in the living room, pushing furniture against the doors and windows. But it didn't matter. The thing was inside. We could hear it moving, creeping closer with every passing second. And then we saw it. Shadows slithering across the walls, forming into shapes that shouldn't exist. One of my friends screamed as a shadow wrapped around his leg, pulling him to the ground. He disappeared into the darkness, his screams cut off abruptly. The rest of us tried to fight, but it was no use. The shadows were everywhere, twisting and writhing like living things. One by one, my friends were taken until I was the only one left. I don't know how I survived. Maybe the thing wanted me to live to tell the story, or maybe it was just luck. But when I woke up the next morning, I was alone. The cabin was empty, the doors and windows wide open. There was no sign of my friends, no sign of the thing that had taken them. Just the doll, sitting on the porch, its rotted face staring up at me. I left that place and never looked back. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the knocking again. It's faint, but it's there. And I know it's only a matter of time before it comes for me. So if you're ever in the woods and you hear a knocking sound, don't answer it. Just turn around and run. Because once you let it in, you'll never be able to make it leave.